Terrence Howard's gross error number 1. Now, nobody yet has taken me up on my offer to spot that error, which occurred within the first 20 minutes of the Joe Rogan Experience 2171. In fact, Kuwait is not a deployment 1373 replied, I would, but I can't sit through 20 minutes of that nonsense. And you know what, Kuwait, I can't fault you for that. I'm a strong believer in garbage in, garbage out, so if you don't feel like subjecting yourself to that for 20 minutes, fair play to you. Now, of course, this whole podcast goes on for a remarkable 4 hours, 240 minutes. That might be the longest JRE to date, I'm not sure. But kudos to both Joe and to Éric for having the patience and the focus and the mental fortitude to make it through those 4 hours. So now the person who came the closest to alluding to the error was 00 Silverback. Silverback, you didn't quite point out the exact error, but you came close to it and you gave us a hint. So I give you props on that. Now, let me break down your comment because there's a lot. Your comment was really well thought out, and I think there's a lot we can unpack here. So, 00 Silverback says, you guys are missing the fact that Terrence was able to have a conversation with Brett. He means Éric Weinstein. There's also a Brett who's an evolutionary biologist who's also appeared on JRE more than once. Okay, so Terrence was able to have a conversation with Éric on stuff 99% of people can't fathom. Okay, well, Silverback, I do not consider myself in the 1%, and yet I was able to fathom what this conversation was about. So, I don't know. I mean, I really shouldn't take that 99% figure literally. I know what you're alluding to, that most people can't even fathom the topics of conversation between Terrence and Éric. Now, here's the counter-argument to that statement. Of the set of people who could fathom everything that's being discussed in terms of the mathematics, how many of them were willing to listen to the 4-hour podcast? That's another question. 00 Silverback goes on, I'm sure he has plenty of holes in his theories. I'm going to interject on that one. So, Silverback, I would call what Terrence states more ideas than theories. Theory is a little more solid than what Terrence is doing. What Terrence does is he connects one concept in one field with another concept in another field. For example, he goes from geometry to physics to numbers and then sort of numerology and then the esoteric. Now, I'm not going to say that these fields can't be connected, but Terrence just makes these leaps without building a solid bridge from one to the next. Just because I as an individual can associate, for example, music with fighting doesn't mean that it's clear to anybody else, number one, or that it actually formulates some sort of universal theory connecting music and sports. It's just something that I connected for myself, within myself, if that makes any sense. Now, a hole in somebody's theory is almost just that. It's just a small gap. You've worked out a complete theory. So, for example, often physicists have a hole in their theory in terms of the mathematics. So they're not necessarily experts at solving complicated equations, so they have to turn to a mathematician and say, hey, can you solve this? Because then that little piece fits into my overall theory. And that has happened. Okay, I can't think of an example right off the bat, but I could get back to you on that if you guys are interested. 00 Silverback goes on, but I was impressed, just like Brett, meaning Eric, was on how intelligent Terrence was. Now, no doubt that Terrence Howard is an intelligent human being. However, because he's trying to put forth an academic argument, the means by which he tried to demonstrate his intelligence fell short because he's entering into the academic fray. So, Terrence has excellent delivery, right? He's very convincing. Skill set that you would expect an actor to have. Terrence also has excellent quick recall in terms of vocabulary and names. It's another skill set you'd expect a great actor to have, right? But now I'm going to flex my teaching background. So there's certainly a theory that there are multiple, what we call multiple intelligences. In academics, what gets measured the most typically are your mathematical intelligence and verbal intelligence. Yet there's kinesthetic intelligence, there's rhythmic intelligence, there's multiple modes in which we could say someone has a high intellect in this area. Now that said, there's also what we call Bloom's taxonomy in terms of learning. You could visualize it kind of like a pyramid, where at the bottom level, it's rote memorization. At the very highest level, it's what we call generation, meaning you're able to create something new, which is what Terrence asserts that he's done. Yet, he falls apart at that bottom level of vocabulary. Now, I do not just mean, when I say vocabulary, I don't just mean words that he mispronounced. I'm also talking about basic building block concepts that Terrence just misinterprets or then misrepresents in his arguments. Now, as a teacher, I would argue that in any area, whether it's sports, music, art, or academics, everybody needs to enter at that bottom basic level to acquire the basic vocabulary for that art. That way you can communicate with other people about what it is that you're doing or attempting to do, and they can provide correction. So, for example, in jiu-jitsu, you do need to know what a kimura is, or you need to know what base means, or posture up, or take their back. That way you can start to improve your skill level and move up that pyramid. Perhaps one day you'll get to that point at the very top where you're able to generate your quote-unquote own moves. But you're not just going to start at the top. You need to start at that base. So effectively, in that light, Terrence tried to just jump straight to the top of that Bloom's taxonomy pyramid without really mastering that foundational level. Now, 00 Silverback goes on. He says, especially because it was self-taught, that's why he mispronounced names. Okay, great job, Silverback, because yes, that's exactly it. You hit the key right there. He did, in fact, mispronounce a name, and that was the dead giveaway for me. Now, Silverback goes on. He says, I love that Brett, meaning Eric, gave him the time and was willing to help. Now, I 100% agree with you on that one, Silverback. There's no way that podcast could have taken place if Eric just slammed him right off the bat and said, hey, you're wrong, you mispronounced that name, I don't even want to hear anything more that you have to say. And then we would not have a conversation after that. So the name that Terrence Howard mispronounced was the famous mathematician Kurt Gödel. Terrence says it, as Eric points out, he says you say words exactly as they are written on the paper. So Terrence makes the gross error of calling him Kurt Gödel. Okay, the problem is it's G-O with the umlaut, D-E-L. That's why it's pronounced Kurt Gödel. Now, again, Eric gives him credit in saying, hey, well, you know what, that makes it obvious to me that you are self-taught, because had you ever And what he's saying is, had you ever attended a math class, there's no way you would have gotten away with calling Kurt Gödel, saying Kurt Gödel. Surely another classmate in the math class would have corrected you and said, hey buddy, it's Gödel, not Gödel. Like, don't say that, it's kind of embarrassing. So rather than smashing Terrence Howard with that fact, Éric instead kind of gives him a lot of grace and tries to flip it in the other direction and make it a positive and say, hey, well, that's just evidence that you're self-taught, and yeah. Now, in this era of everybody gets a trophy, I'm sure there are some who will argue that, well, what's one little umlaut between friends? Saying Gödel instead of Gödel, that's not really a big deal. Except that, again, I make the analogy with the jiu-jitsu. If you are supposedly a self-taught YouTuber who goes and looks at YouTube videos on jiu-jitsu and reads books, but you never actually sign up for classes, and you never, certainly ever dare compete, but yet in your mind you reinvent jiu-jitsu and then run up to a jiu-jitsu master and start telling them how Royce and Rickson, Gracie, and the Gracie Barra system are completely flawed, then I highly doubt you're going to get much of an audience, right? And rightfully so. How are they supposed to take you seriously if you don't have the time to even look up how to pronounce certain masters' names correctly? If you do a really quick search on YouTube on Kurt and then just plug in the letters Godel, I can pretty much guarantee you that the first video that pops up, someone's going to pronounce it correctly as Gödel, not Gödel. In the late 70s, Gödel was brought somewhat into the mainstream consciousness in this book called Gödel, Escher, Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid. Now, some of you probably are familiar with Escher's etchings of tessellated angels and devils, or his infamous staircases that kind of lead to nowhere. It's kind of a geometric and mathematical conundrum that he represented visually. And then I'm sure many of you are also familiar with Bach, and in that book the author kind of delves into Bach's play with what we call counterpoint. A couple other folks brought up the whole 1 × 1 = 2 statement that I guess Terrence Howard has now become infamous for. Christopher Clipstrom, 6729, Christopher with 1 H, I stand corrected, says, apart from the 1 × 1 = 2 insanity he's been spouting all along, the rest enters my ear as a foreign language, the reason being that I'm terrible at math beyond its basic formulas. So here's the thing, as far as a lot of what Terrence Howard asserts, he delivers his ideas very rapidly, number one, and number two, in a very convincing manner. So I can understand why it's a bit of an ear overload and also a little bit of a mental overload. But here's the thing. We could actually deconstruct a lot of and refute a lot of what Terrence Howard says with simply high school level math and physics. Now he like I said, he jumps that level all the way up to the top. So he does name drop a lot in terms of famous mathematicians and famous physicians, but he's not even on the level to sort of open the door and walk in the room with these members of academia. And I will absolutely refute that the reason he's running into closed doors is simply due to quote-unquote intellectual snobbery. It's just he hasn't even humbled himself enough to take day one lessons or sign up for 3 months worth of classes if it was a jiu-jitsu school. And Eric alludes to this towards the end of the podcast. I think it's within the last half hour of the podcast. Eric just blatantly says to him, you need to get your ass kicked. And he doesn't really mean that physically. He means, you need to get your ass kicked intellectually. And then Eric goes on to recount how he felt, he got his ass kicked intellectually when he was in grad school at Harvard, I think. But nevertheless, the point he's making is you actually do need to get in there and mix it around, have your ideas get refuted and disputed and argue through your so-called theories, and then be humbled. Because until you're humbled, you can't start to build back on what you have. So in essence, in this conversation between Terrence Howard and Eric Weinstein, what we have is Eric Weinstein, very high-level, world-class black belt, dealing with someone who literally hasn't even put on the uniform, hasn't even tied the white belt around their waist yet, but thinks that they're onto something. And the high-level black belt is just very graciously and with a lot of humanity just affording this self-avowed, brilliant white belt the space to share their ideas. And then the high-level black belt is really searching through all this sand for the absolute gems, potential gems in what this white belt has to offer. So there you have it. There's the first gross error that Terrence Howard makes, which is to mispronounce Gödel as Gödel. And I will make additional videos about the 1 × 1 = 2 business and a few of the other points where Terrence's arguments kind of fall short. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please feel free to head over to buymeacoffee.com and buy a coffee for $5 US. Or if you care to, you can head over to the super thanks way over on the right under the video and leave a super thanks starting at $2 US. If you enjoy having these types of conversations, I invite you to join us in the members-only forum. Just head up towards the banner and click on join, or head down to the description and click on the link there. Thank you, and I look forward to reading your comments.